Hi, everybody. Today we are going to cover up business continuity and disaster recovery plan. Right? In the first side, these two process, this seems to be separate process, but that's not the case actually. And why is it so? We are going to cover up into the upcoming slides for sure. And let's go ahead and explore this. Before actually we talk about the business continuity and disaster recovery, I want that you should think about some questions here. Let's do some brainstorming. So, first question is, what is the end game? What we are going to achieve by having the BCP and DR plan? What is that, right? So, by having your BCP plan and the DR plan, the end game is all about maintaining the business continuity so that there should not be any impact on the business. And at the same time, the business has the capability to recover as and when there is a disaster. Parallelly, something on the recovery side and something on the business continuity side. Both the things have to work together to actually fulfill the business objective, right? So that's one of the things which I wanted you to think. Next question is BCP and DR part of risk management? So I think this is a fairly simple question here, right? The entire security effort, let it be any activity which is related to security, it is all tied up with the risk management. Security is there for risk management, as simple as that. So BCP also is part of the risk management, and how it is actually fitting in the entire machinery. We will talk about in the next slide, right? Then is BCP DR just a technology problem? Now, why I have put up this question is many of the organization, the business owner, they sometimes thinks that the BCPDR is just a technology problem. It is the problem of the IT department, and they are not responsible for it. Whereas that is just a myth. That's not the true statement, right? BCPDR is the responsibility, is a shared responsibility for each and everyone. Maybe there may be a BCP team, there may be a BCP coordinator who is much more accountable and responsible for certain activities. But when it comes to the entire fulfillment of the plan, it is the shared responsibility of each and everyone. Okay, so that's the thing. Next question is scope of BCDR. Should it include everything? Uh, that means what? Uh, like, as and when some kind of disaster happen, should we kind of include everything for recovery? That's the question, right? So I would say no, because whenever there is a disaster, that is the impact on the capability of a particular organization, and during that time, definitely we will not be able to perform at 100%. We cannot make all our process as operational. So during that time, we have to focus more on critical process, which are the key drivers for our business. We have to think about the dependencies as part of those process, and we try to accommodate everything, and then we think over how we are going to respond to this situation so that there is minimal impact to the business. So as far as scope is concerned, I would say it's only includes the critical business process as part of the BCDR. Then the next question is, what is the difference between incident management, disaster recovery, and BCP, right? So this is a big question because many people, they fail to understand the difference between these processes. And I think in the next slide, when I'm going to explain you where actually the BCP actually fits in into the entire security process, then you will be able to come to know about it. And then finally, the question is, how do we get this implemented? If, for example, you are hired as a security advisor for a company and you are asked to lead the BCP team or set up a BCP program for a company, what should be your approach towards setting up a BCP plan? So we will talk about all these things in this session today, right? But before I go more onto the process side, I would like to give you a very wide, at a 30 feet high view on where actually the entire BCP process or the disaster recovery process fits in, right? Right. What you see on your screen, there is a blue rectangle, right? This blue rectangle is representing the boundary for a particular enterprise. For example, you are working for this enterprise and this is the boundary. This boundary is not physical boundary. This is a kind of logical boundary which we are setting up for explaining the risk landscape, right? Now, when I say risk landscape, what is the risk landscape? Anything which can create, which can impact an organization in a negative way is a risk. So this risk can be external. So whatever you see out of this blue rectangle is all external factors. What all it can be? It can be a legal problem. For example, there is a local or the global law which your company is not compliant with. Then your company may have to pay fines. That's the risk for the company, right? Sometimes the culture itself is a risk. For example, your company is operating on some kind of event management, and those kind of events are not acceptable by the culture of that particular country. Just for an example, right? So that can be a risk. People may get annoyed, and they may try to create some harm to the business, right? So culture also plays a very, very important role. That is why in some of the countries you see the multinational companies, they go and make their offices. They are very happy working out there. But in few countries, they don't even like to go just because of the culture. Similarly, there are political aspect as well, because if a country is suffering from some political instability and things like it, that will be having a negative impact on the company. Likewise, location. If, for example, there is a country which is very highly prone to maybe earthquake or maybe tornadoes and things like it, companies would not prefer to make their offices there, right? So these kind of things, they are not in the control of the human beings. They are not in the control of the company. They are external. We have to live with it. Now, how do we live it with it is an art. We try to do some kind of risk management to take care of all these external factors, right? Then let's come inside this blue rectangle. So whatever you see inside is your internal company internal risk. So the risk can be in the form of people risk. For example, one of your employee, by mistake, he synced his own laptop with Google Drive, which is not an approved solution in your company, right? So all the intellectual property which is there on your laptop, all important data is getting synced with Google Drive. That can be a problem. There may be an instance wherein a particular employee is not a happy employee and he tried to do some fraud. So the risk is also from the people perspective, right? Similarly, there can be risks from the process perspective, wherein you have a certain process, but that process is not serving you so well. That has some kind of gap into it. And because of that gap, sometimes you have to suffer some losses, maybe financial losses or maybe reputational losses or whatever losses are there, right? So there can be a process risk as well. Then finally, technology risk, because as part of the IT department, we are all dealing with IT assets and servers, desktop, laptops, IoTs, and all that. There can be risk associated with the technology as well. Like, for example, you have some kind of IP cameras, and these IP cameras have some vulnerability now. right? So that way, it is a risk to the enterprise. Okay, and then guys, there are some kind of inherent risks when your company is actually dealing with some other company, right? For example, you have suppliers, the companies who are giving you supplies. There are vendors with whom you are purchasing something, or you have some kind of customers who are actually accessing your environment. If they are compromised, then that can also have a negative effect on your company, right? So you can see, guys, how is the landscape, the risk landscape is there. There is external risk and there is always the internal risk. Now, the next question is, how do we cover? How do we come out of this situation? How do we regulate this situation, right? And that is where whatever steps I have given, identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. This is nothing but the 5 pillars of the NIST framework, NIST Cybersecurity Framework. So this framework is a very good framework which describes, right? You need to identify what risk you have. So you need to carry out a risk analysis. Based on that, you will prioritize your risk, you will implement some controls, and then after implementation of those controls also, you need to have a detection mechanism. You need a mechanism wherein you can detect if there is some kind of intrusion or something is not working well. So we need to have some detection mechanism as well. Just like your SIM solution, it's nothing but a detection mechanism, right? And then if something goes bad, then you also need to have something called as a respond mechanism. So whatever we call it as a incident response plan is nothing but a response mechanism out there. What happens is sometimes is nothing works. Even your incident response program is not able to help you because, for example, this particular pandemic, is there a point raising an incident? This pandemic is for a worldwide situation, right? And we have to quickly respond to this. So sometimes the disaster, something which is not in your control, will be called as a disaster, and that is where we need to have a predefined process, a predefined checklist which we can follow during a disaster. So there is no what you say, there is no chaos when such a thing happens, right? So that is how the BCDR is coming as part of your recover step, as part of the security implementation. Now, what is your entire objective? What is the end objective of having the BCP plan, right? So BCP plan is there to minimize impact to such a level, maybe zero if possible, before the disaster has happened, then during the disaster, and even after the disaster, right? When we are recovering back, there should not be any impact on the business. That's the intention of having the BCP objective. Now, you may also think, what is the difference between a BCP and a DR? BCP stands for Business Continuity Plan, and DR stands for Disaster Recovery Plan. So, guys, BCP is more on the business side of it. We are more focused on process, on critical process or critical functions which need to be immediately uh, uh, put on if there is a disaster, so that there is no impact to the business, there is no impact to the earning, there is no impact to the trust. So that is how the BCP plan is laid out. Actually, BCP plan is a bigger thing, and disaster recovery plan is little bit more technical. It is more on the IT side of it. For example, how the IT, if something goes bad, then we need to recover some IT systems and immediately respond to the situation and minimize the impact at the same time and also recover from that particular situation. So BCP and DR, they are very closely bind. As you can see here in this slide, the business continuity plan is a bigger one, and disaster recovery plan is one part of the entire BCP plan, right? It is good to say that the disaster recovery plan, it serves as a subset of the overall business continuity. Okay. Now that we understood what is BCP, what is DR, what is their differences, why at all we have it, let's also talk about the advantages of having a BCP plan. So it prevents human life. That's the most important factor. As part of your CISSP examination also, please remember if you have four choices, somebody is asking you what for which you will go first. And if there is a statement of preventing the human lives, that should always be your answer. Always remember, right? And then minimize the effect of a disruption and risk of financial loss. So, if, for example, like in during COVID situation, when this situation came, those companies who already had the remote access kind of mechanism and their people were already working from home, for them it was kind of easier than those companies who never thought about it. So immediately what happened is those companies who were very proactive on it, they immediately responded to the situation, and because of that there was new clients which came to them, right? Because client needs some kind of trust. So they seen that they have quickly responded to the situation, so they gain more profits out of it. Then meet legal and statutory obligations, right? Because BCP plan is just not a luxury nowadays, it's a legal requirement for you to have it. Almost all the framework which are there, when we implement those, they all talk about BCP. That is so important, right? And obviously, if you have a good BCP plan, it's going to retain the company brand and image. It's going to enhance the trust on the company. Okay, and then enable the recovery of critical systems within an agreed time frame. So what happens is in BCP plan, we predefined, okay, man, if this server goes down, we are going to recover it within 2 hours. And that is how we set up the other technologies like that, right? So accordingly, based on your MTD, we define it, and that is how we are able to actually achieve the objective. Right? So I hope now you are aware of what are the advantages of having the BCP plan. Let's go to next slide and talk about what are the different disasters out there. So there are natural disasters, as you can see, all of these: flood, tsunamis, earthquake, volcanoes, jungle fire, cyclones, and things like it. Then there are disasters which are man-made, which are not natural but man-made, like vandalism. There is protest, there is accident, and then terrorist attacks. Also, there are environmental failures. For example, your particular location does not have power for maybe 10 days for a longer period. That is again a disaster. Sometimes it can be based on technology. The way we work is not right. You can see the wire, how they are spread up. And if something goes bad with this jumble up, a lot of network equipment will be affected by this. If the heat is more, then that is also an environmental factor. Things can burn out. If the humidity is high, then there can be droplets on your computing systems, and that can impact their quality. So these are some of the environmental failures. Next question: is every disruption or interruption a disaster? Is every interruption a disaster? Right? That is what we need to understand. I have seen many companies, they really struggle onto this aspect. What happens is we need to know what should be the criteria for declaring a particular disaster, right? It should not be that every interruption you immediately declare a disaster. People will not take it seriously after some time. So we need to understand the actual impact on the business and how much impact in terms of time, in terms of finances, in terms of reputation, it is going to have on our company. Based on that, we need to set up the criteria for declaring a disaster. Also, the person who is going to declare the disaster, who he should be, he or she be just a normal employee, or it should be a leadership focal who is actually understanding the business in a much better way, right? So it is always recommended that there should be some leadership involvement while we are declaring a particular disaster, because these people who are there on a high level, they understand business much better than people who are there at a lower level, right? So that is a very, very important question when it comes to disaster. Let's do a quick walkthrough through the entire process, BCP and DR, right? So as part of the BCP process, there is project management and initiation. For example, you joined a new company and they hired you to set up their BCP plan. Okay, so what you will do? Is it good that you will go random? Not the right way, right? So what you should do is you should follow the project management practices, and then there has to be leadership support for you. It has to come from the top to down, and then you will see for resources and everything. You will set up a team, you will set up the roles and responsibility. All that thing will come as part of the project management and initiative. Next one is BIA, Business Impact Analysis. We will understand this particular analysis in some further slides. Okay. Then recovery strategy. Once you identify what are my critical assets and within how much time I actually need to recover them, then you will go for the recovery strategy. That means what kind of controls I need to bring in so that I am able to recover fast as per the requirement of the plan. Okay, and then when you set up all these things, you think about it, you document it, then it comes plan, design, and development. This is where you will formally set and prepare the plan, you will design it, and then you will develop it, and then send it for leadership approval. Once they approve it, then the plan can be implemented. During the implementation phase as well, a lot of things goes in, because you may need to spend some funds on purchasing maybe few fire equipment and things like it. All right. So implementation is again very, very important. Now, is that everything? Have you implemented your BCP plan? Is that everything? No, it has to be tested. How well is your entire BCP plan functioning? You need to test it, right? And finally, just not testing, you need to maintain it on a regular basis. At least yearly once, you should update your process and also make people aware that such a process exists, right? So at the neck of the moment, people are not just roaming here and there and people are in troubles. So that's the thing. Quickly, we will go through these steps: scope and plan initiation. So in the scope and plan initiation means you set up the scope. This particular scope for your BCP plan, it can be impacted by multiple factors. It can be impacted by the legal or compliance requirement. It can also be impacted by contractual requirement. Your company is outsourcing, or your company is serving some other company, and that company wants you to implement the BCP plan. So the scope will change based on that. And finally, there are business requirements, right? So business requirement is where your own requirement, your own company business requirement. So while you actually set up the entire BCP scenario, the first thing which you should do is to frame a BCP policy. That's the first thing, right? And when you prepare this particular policy, you talk about scope, which we have just discussed. Then you will also talk about the roles and responsibility. Your policy should have the roles and responsibilities defined. Who is responsible for what? And then it's just not enough preparing a policy. This particular policy has to be updated at a regular interval, because I have seen companies. One of my friend who was the manager, security manager in one of the company, while I called him during pandemic, he told, "Man, we are just busy removing dust from our BCP plan. We never thought of any such pandemic situation, right? Now we are just dusting it up and we are trying to see how we can actually react to it. So if your BCP plan is not updated, it's going to be a problem always. So the first step should be prepare a policy. Once you prepare the policy, the next part should be structured business organization analysis. What does that mean? So that means you need to understand what industry my particular company is working with, what is the trend for this particular industry, how important the BCP is as part of this industry. Are there some legal regulations which are more specific to this particular industry? So you will understand the risk scenario just based on your own industry, right? So that will be an additional part which you have to play, right? Once you do that, once you do that, the next part will be preparing a BCP team. Okay, I'll just take a quick pause. Okay, so the next part will be setting up the BCP team because you are hired just as a BCP coordinator. May not because BCP is a big effort. It's not that it's just a simple project. You have to integrate BCP into each and every function of the organization. There may be hundreds of projects with your company, and there may be hundreds of projects having critical assets which you need to recover because end of the day all these projects are contributing to the business, right? So you need to have more and more people who should work with you, right? So oftentimes in company what happens is there is a core team and there is a extended team, and there are people from different areas of the enterprise. Like for example, there will be people from HR, there will be people from legal, there will be people who are IT expertise, there will be people who deal with servers or whatever things out there. So it has to be a combination, a pooled kind of team, so that while you are working on few things, you actually get that expertise from all of them, right? That's the idea while setting up the BCP team. Next is resource requirement. So what is resource requirement? For example, you have a server which is really very critical for the business, right? And you declare it as part of the scope of the BCP plan. Everything is done. You laid out everything, but you miss on maybe a simple thing, maybe a hard drive, a component. You don't have that component. So that is one dependency for this particular server. And at the neck of the movement, when thing actually happens, and if that particular equipment goes down, because you don't catered for that dependencies earlier, that may again lead to the failure of the entire BCP plan. So you need to think just not about the critical assets, but also about the dependencies which are associated with that particular asset, right? For example, a simple example can be there is heavy rains in Bangalore, and your company decided, okay, we have an office in maybe Mysore, so let's ask people to join that office and work from there. Now you designed everything, but end of the day, at the final day, you understood that there is no transport. You did not have the adequate agreement with the transport team. So because transport again is a dependency, so your BCP plan is going to fail. So you have to think from all the directions. Okay. Then next is legal and regulatory requirement, which is always on the top, because legal and regulatory requirement, there is nothing like 10% compliant or 50% compliance or 80% compliance. It is just like 0% compliant or 100% compliant. That means no compliance or compliance. There is nothing in between. So you have to get compliant with those regulations. Okay. So planning should take in account the people, process, and the systems. Project initiation should be a top-down approach. Scope should be limited because you cannot really expand the scope unlimited way. You don't have that much resources. You really need to focus on more critical functions and the assets. That only should be part of your scope. Then define clear objectives. That means whenever you are maybe designing a policy or framing a particular BCP process, let's be very clear what is expected from whom. Let's not make it little unambiguous. So that's very, very important because this is the document which the people will refer during the disaster. If there is any kind of ambiguity into this, this is going to fail each and everything, right? Next thing is understand constraint because all the time your company may not have the all the funds to actually invest, or there may be some technical limitation, right? You need to port a particular software onto another server, but because of some dependency issues, maybe because of a legacy software, you are not actually able to do that. So there will always be constraint in terms of budget, in terms of resources, right? And then based on that, sometimes we need to decide, okay, yeah, we know this is something we are not able to do it, and this is a particular risk. There has to be a formal risk acceptance. If you are not able to cover a particular risk, let's have the risk acceptance signed by the right business owner. That's very, very important. Okay. Document assumptions used in the planning, resources for planning, like as part of the BCP process, we have to assume a lot of things. We have to assume, okay, if tomorrow flood comes, right? If tomorrow earthquake happens. So these are all the assumptions. But how realistic these assumptions are? Have you done some kind of calculation on that? Have you done some kind of thesis on that? Some kind of research on that? It has to be based on fact. And whatever assumptions you are making has to be realistic assumptions. So that, because end of the day, these assumptions is what we are working for. We are actually investing money to prevent that particular risk. So that is something we need to understand. Okay, and deliverables and timelines. Uh, as part of the plan, you will actually set up, okay, by end of this quarter, we are going to achieve this particular task. So those are the kind of activities which you need to perform in the planning phase. This is still the plan is on papers, guys. Nothing has been implemented. And please remember, your team, your BCP team, or yourself, you are not the experts. End of the day, you have to follow up with multiple people. You may have to conduct some kind of survey. You have to send some emails. You have to do some kind of interviews with different SMEs and project managers uh, because they know their area better. You are not there to explore everything. So you have to rely on them. You have to make them understand this is what actually we are trying to do, and this is where we are expecting your contribution, right? So based on that, we will work. Okay. So now you are a BCP coordinator. You have a team with you. You have decided the roles and responsibility. You have designed a policy, and now you are also designing and kind of planning the entire phase. Okay. Now, next thing, business impact analysis. Now we have something on the paper. We understand which direction we need to move. But before all that to happen on ground practically, what we need to do? We need to carry out a business impact analysis. Now, what is a business impact analysis? We call it as BIA. We actually see these are the kind of assets with us, right? And if this particular asset is not available one day, then what is the impact on the business? That is what is the intent of the BIA plan. Okay, so this is the analysis we are going to do. Please remember, in domain one, we also talk about the risk assessment. So in risk assessment, also we had a similar kind of activity wherein we documented all the assets, we documented their asset value, we documented few things like threats and likelihood and impact, and then calculated the risk. Here, what we will do, we will go back to the same business analysis, risk analysis report. We will take out those assets, and then based on that, we will see what is their asset value. What is the actual value for this asset to the company? If they are high, then it should be part of our BCP plan. And please understand, guys, when we say value, it's just not financial value. It's not some dollar value. Maybe there is a small equipment which is maybe just costing few $100s, but if that is not there, that will not let the uh, that can be a showstopper if it is not available. So we have to think in that direction. And even if the financial cost of that particular asset is less, we need to include that into the BCP plan, right? So we will take that Excel sheet, for example, and then we will break it up. Then we will segregate, we will filter, we'll go through and have some meetings with the different project managers. We will understand from them. We will say, okay, now you have 100 assets. How many of these assets are critical for you, right? So that way we will try to understand from there. Now, business impact analysis identifies the resources that are critical to an organization's ongoing viability and the threat posted to those resources. Now, what we will do, we will identify by this entire BIA activity, we will identify the critical resources and then estimate their downtime, tolerable, maximum tolerable downtime. Now, guys, what is maximum tolerable downtime? Right? Maximum tolerable downtime is the downtime that the company can afford for a particular asset. There is a server which is actually involved into some kind of e-commerce activity. Then the business will decide that this is something very, very critical for us. We can have a maximum of 2 minutes for this server to go down. Otherwise, this will cost us more. Now, what you need to do based on this MTD itself, you will design some kind of controls so that within this 2 minutes we are able to recover. If something goes bad, maybe switching to the another server immediately. So that is what is called the MTD. Like MTD, we have another term which is called as RPO, Recovery Point Objective. So recovery point objective is the overall amount of data which your company can afford to lose, right? For me, I have a product company, I have distributors which are spread across. If my website is down, not a big deal for me. Even it can be down for 2 days because this is not having any impact on me. So my RPO is very, very high, right? On the other hand, there can be a e-commerce company like Amazon or eBay and this kind of company. For them, their online presence is most important. If their server is down for just 2 minutes, they are losing lakhs or crores of rupees out there, right? So their RPO, the recovery point objective, is very less. That means, for example, if everything is working fine at 10 o'clock and you took a backup at 10:30 and something goes bad with your server at 10:45. Now, whenever you're recovering back your system, you are losing 15 minutes of transactions. So, how much you are actually able to lose is what is called as recovery point objective. If a company has a very low RPO requirement, then their backup will be much more frequent, right? So they don't lose anything. Okay, so we will calculate based on this analysis, we will calculate MTD, we will calculate RPO, and the third thing is the RTO, recovery time objective. Recovery time objective is the total time required for a particular asset to be restored. Okay, so these three values we will drive out of this analysis. Can you drive it? Or can somebody who is external to a particular project can drive it? No. These kind of values has to come up from respective project managers. or it has to come from their SMEs. You will not be able to do that. You can suggest as part of your BCP team, you can give them suggestions, but at the same time, we have to hear back to them, right? So that is how your entire MTD will work, and then estimate resource requirement. Now you identify a asset who is having MTD, you calculated MTD, RPO, RTO, everything you calculated. Now there may be some dependencies. Maybe there is a dependency on a particular resource, and that resource is not available at that time, right? So you have to take all those dependencies also in account while performing this kind of BIA, right? This BIA will be as simple as just like an Excel sheet, and then you will keep on documenting. Okay, let's see how the entire BIA process works. So first and foremost, we will identify priorities. In that, what we will do, we will identify critical services and function. We will sit together and then we will keep on documenting what are the critical business functions. If these are down, then there will be loss to the company. We will go and document all that. Then we will create a master priority list, right? Then that priority list, against that column, we also will have another column which is called as assigning asset value. That means it may be we can take it up from the CMDB, maybe your asset management, or we can also ask the respective project team what is the value for this particular asset, right? And then based on that, we will document as I told you, MTD, RTO, RPO, all those kind of things. Okay. Next, uh, no, now that you have the list, you have the scope, whatever list you had in your this thing, you have everything documented. Now, what to do next? Next will be you will identify, maybe you have to assume few things, and then you will document. Okay, this is a particular server, this is hosted on Java, like the programming language is Java, and this particular software is using this kind of encryption. So let us see what kind of risk is associated with that. It may be that the Java platform is vulnerable to a particular vulnerability, right? Or maybe buffer overflow. I'm just assuming, right? So based on all that thing, you will document. Is it natural? Is it man-made? Or is it what kind of risk can actually go and hit this particular? It is nothing but again, we are doing some kind of risk analysis. Okay. And caution here is that do not forget critical business component hosted on cloud. Many times we are so busy with things that we just think about assets which are there, which we are able to physically see and calculate. Sometimes we forget that we have a website which is hosted on a third party server on the cloud, right? So we don't take that into account. So you have to take special care for that situation. Okay, so that is how, guys, we are able to identify what all critical assets are there, and then we identify the risk which is associated with that. What next? We will also think about what is the likelihood. Very important. This thing can go bad. I agree, this can go bad. But what is the likelihood? How often it can happen? That is what we need to drive. Okay, so that likelihood is very, very important, right? So likelihood also, calculating likelihood is not an easy task because a lot of research has to go into it. For example, uh, there is a facility and you are planning for that. Now you already know this facility can be hit by a flood, but how frequently? If this particular flood is coming once in 10 years or once in 100 years, is this really worth to spend so much money onto this? Right? The idea here is to calculate what is the likelihood. How do we calculate? We have to maybe sometimes go back to the local government authorities, try to understand what has been the history for this particular area, or we have to go back to some experts, SMEs out there. We have to go and search the corporate history and things like it. And based on that only, you will prepare your assumptions, right? So now you understood these things. Now, next thing is, how do we, in what format should we take this likelihood? So normally, likelihood is expressed in terms of annualized rate of occurrence. What is that, right? We, in domain one, we have talked about single loss expectancy and then annual loss expectancy, right? So single loss expectancy is, for example, if a fire occurs once, then if there is a loss of $50,000, if the same fire occurs twice in a year, then it will be double the amount. So how much we are losing in a particular year is what is the likelihood, right? For example, if the flood comes in once in 5 years, then the likelihood will be 1 by 5. If the flood comes 5 times a year, it will be 5 into 1 is equal to 5. So that kind of value we need to document in the plan, in the risk BIA. Okay. Now, this is the formula we are going to have, right? Single loss expectancy and annual loss expectancy. Single loss expectancy into annual rate of occurrence will provide us some kind of quantitative perspective on the loss, uh, right? So that is how we are actually calculating risk. It's nothing but again the risk analysis. Not everything can be gauged well. There are few terms which you will not be able to gauge, right? For example, reputation. How do you gauge it? It's very difficult. Goodwill, your trust with your clients, how you are going to do that? There is social responsibility, how you are going to measure that? So these are some terms which definitely need to be documented, but at the same time, we don't have a solid way to do it. We can't put it in terms of easily in terms of some dollar value. So that is where we need some expertise, we need some consulting from our senior leadership, because they are the people who are actually dealing with business, so they can tell if this particular thing is down, this is the bigger impact, this is the client who is going to be impacted, and this is going to be the impact. So they can help us out with some type of qualitative perspective. So generally, what happens practically? It's generally a mix of quantitative approach and the qualitative approach both. That is how the impact assessment is done. Okay, and then once we do this, once we document this kind of thing, we will document that into a particular Excel. Your Excel may look like this on the left hand side, whatever you see, right? So what all things we have documented here? We have functional area, we have functions, we have description of that particular thing, risk code, if it is a financial risk, if it is a customer risk, if it is regulatory risk. We just segregate it into few things, and then impact category. That's the most important. It's a severe impact, then we need to have definition for the severe impact. If the loss exceed this much amount, we are going to term it as severe. Okay, that way we will define some kind of criteria, and based on that we will categorize the different impacts. And then we will also document what is their MTD, RTO, and RTO, right? And based on that, we will then decide, we will sort out this particular list, and we will come out with a recovery priority numbers, right? So that you are able to take some actions on priority. What things you will prioritize over others. That is what we are actually striving for. Okay. So end of the day, what we are able to achieve by doing the BIA, we measured impact, we understood what is the maximum tolerable downtime, which we have to get it from the business owner. We are also going to get what is the recovery time objective, and also more importantly, we are identifying the recovery priorities. So your list is now ready, and you are ready for some action. Same list, you will go and present it to your leadership. Leadership then will decide, okay, this is the risk which is on a high level, and these are the kind of steps I have to take. Maybe your company will prefer to go for some kind of insurance as part of risk transfer, right? So we have some decision making which is involved out there, right? And that will be taken care. while you deal with your leadership. Okay. Now, what BCP development steps? So it's just a kind of overview on these things as well, and some further steps as well. So we evaluate appropriate controls based on MTD, RPO, and RTO, which we just have seen. Then what next? Next is preventive strategies. What kind of preventive controls you can implement so that such a thing does not happen in first place? What you can do, you can go and train your people. You can harden the infrastructure, you can make it much more robust. And if there are some more exposure, if uh, these things are like you more exposed to the threats, we will try to cover that up. Advanced backup technologies we may bring in. We may also rely on some kind of load balancing, and then threat monitoring. Threat monitoring for what? Because you want to be proactive here, right? So these are some kind of preventive strategies which you can have. Then, even if putting after this all these preventive strategies, something goes bad, then how you are going to react to that? So we will have some strategies which will be focusing to handle these kind of events. So we will have some kind of process defined, and in some cases we may also need some alternate site. What is an alternate site? For example, if Bangalore is flooded, you may shift all your operations maybe to Hyderabad, or maybe to Hosur or somewhere nearby, right? So that thing you need to have. And then finally, you will document each and everything as part of the. So this slide talks about BCP documentation. So how your entire flow, the document flow will work. You will document BCP goals. You will document a statement of importance, a statement of priorities. What will be your priorities? What criteria you are following up? Then a statement of organizational responsibility. Who is responsible for what? Then statement of urgency and timing, which all things like talking more about your MTD and RPO and RQ, right? Those things we will talk about. And then emergency response guidelines. So this is where we will touch upon to your disaster recovery plan as well. Okay, and then we will also document, okay, few of the risks we are not able to cover up because of so and so constraint, and this is what is the risk acceptance from the business owner. That kind of things need to be documented, right? And then emergency response guidelines. How do we actually respond during an emergency? To whom we need to inform? What all people are responsible to immediately act upon? Kind of things we will document it there, right? And also, it is always recommended that your BCP expectation should also be putting as part of your JD, as part of hiring process. This is how a sample BCP plan looks like. You can just have a look. Now, as we told, right, BCP and disaster recovery are no two different plans. There may be separate attention to that with a different perspective, but yes, it is part of the same story. So, disaster recovery plan is again no different than BCP plan, but in disaster recovery itself, the focus is little different. So these are predefined process and procedures. What is disaster recovery? It is a set of predefined process and procedures which is defined by the management which need to be executed during an emergency. Right? What are the outcomes of business disaster recovery plan? For different people, it may mean different things. For leadership, it may they may need a short summary of entire thing. What has happened? What is the impact? What we are going to do, right? Then for different departments, we may have different detailed plans. This particular department, they have to do this set of activities. Other department may have to do some other set of activities, right? So it can mean different things for different people. It can provide technical guidance for IT personals while they are recovering things, maybe some kind of key restoration, maybe some kind of escort and those kind of things, right? In many of the cases, we have a lot of checklist as part of the disaster recovery, because see, disaster recovery plan is followed when everything goes bad and people are panicking. During that panic, if everybody start coming with their own ideas, it's not going to work. So instead of that, we need to have a particular checklist which everybody can follow. So checklists are very, very popular when it comes to disaster recovery. Then copies of the plan for stakeholder. All different stakeholders may have one copy. We need to make sure that they have accessibility to it. And we have to make sure that a general plan is given to all, and maybe more specific plan are given to those people who are more closely associated with that. Right? So things like that will be there. This is how your disaster recovery plans look like. So what we will do, your departments, your different departments in your company may already have some kind of document on disaster recovery. What we need to do, we need to assemble all of them. Then we need to identify the scope, because that may be part of your entire BCP plan by itself, right? We will identify the scope. We will appoint emergency contacts who will be responsible for which activity, those kind of roles and responsibility we need to define. Then designate disaster recovery team. Without a disaster recovery team, nothing can happen, because these are the people who will be your first responder. Okay, then assigning them the right roles and responsibility, and even power, right? That we need to think of. And then we also have to think about data and backup locations, restore technology and functions. And finally, when everything is ready, then you need to test out your entire disaster recovery plan. So this is how the entire disaster recovery flow works in. Okay, let's talk about the first response. Now, something went bad today. Your server room is on fire. Who will be the first responder? Somebody from the disaster recovery team will be responsible for it to immediately act. What he will do? The first thing he will do will be assess the disaster and estimate the impact. How big is this particular disaster and how much is the impact? He will do his own assessment. After that, he will go back and refer to the disaster recovery plan. What kind of checklist we need to follow in this particular situation? Maybe we need to contact few people for information purpose and to pass on that particular information, and also to the rest of the disaster recovery team. So these people also get along with them. Maybe few within few hours, these people will also come, right? And the type of response is actually dependent on nature of disaster and response time. You cannot have a plan which cover each and every scenario in the world. You cannot, because that will be endless documentation, right? What we can do, because see, for before pandemic, nobody thought about pandemic, right? Maybe many companies may not have that as part of their plan. So who knows? Anything new can come, right? So we cannot have a control on that, but what we can do is, at least for the known best practices, we can have some checklists which are prepared, right? And same is what we are doing. So this guy who has responded maybe to the server fire at that time, he estimated the impact, he informed people, and then at the bare minimum, what he could do, he started doing on that. And in the meantime, your actual team, your actual disaster recovery team has now assembled. Now, this actual disaster team will then assess the situation. What is the damage? How much is the impact? How big is the impact? And what kind of impact it can have on the business or on the reputation? Based on that, they will gauge the effectiveness of the DER effort, what has been put in by the first responder. They may prioritize the assignment of resources for few things. They may also check backup strategy and those kind of things. Maybe, for example, there is one server and data need to be recovered. This particular data is encrypted, and the team does not have the encryption key, decryption key, right? So they need to see what kind of arrangement is there. So they will follow that checklist as per that, right? And then they may, in some case, need to arrange some kind of logistic and also external communication. You may have to, like for example, if your company is hit by a big ransomware, now you are part of the entire ecosystem. You have suppliers, you have vendors, you have customers. How well this particular incident you are going to convey with them? Instead of they coming and telling you that you have been hit by a ransomware, it should be your prompt action that you should be able to communicate to them in a very positive way, that what action, what has happened, and what we are actually doing for it. It does not mean that you lie down to them. You should not lie anyways. You should be transparent, but you can actually tell these are the kind of efforts we are going to put in, right? So all that is what done by your disaster recovery team. Okay. Now, when everything happened, you immediately responded. Now, at some point of time, you will also try to recover, right? And in some cases, for example, if a disaster has happened, your server room got fire, you may have to shift to another server room, right? While shifting to maybe another site, maybe we used to call it as alternate site. Please remember, always transfer the most critical function first while you are going to respond to the situation. Now, when you are going to recover from the situation, restore from the situation, that time the scenario will be little different, right? So we are talking about recovery. So business operations and process back to working state. That is what our intention. We want to bring it back. We have to follow very strict timelines because we have to adhere to MTD and RTO, or maybe service delivery downtime and all those kind of things. Team must start working swiftly after quick assessment. Most critical business functions should be recovered first. Please remember, most critical business functions should be recovered first. This very well can be a question in your CISSP exam. You must understand. Then, when you actually recovered and now you are restoring, there is a difference between recovering from a disaster, that means immediate step what you took, and then restoration is bringing back services to the production. That time, please understand that it is also very critical, and we need to be very careful while we are bringing back these services online. That means on the production. During that time, most critical business function should be restored at last. Please understand. While recovery, most critical function will be done first, and while restoring, the most critical function will be done last. Why is it so? Any justification? Justification is that, see, while you are restoring, maybe few things you are expecting that it will go fine, but that may still go down. That may not work well. So while restoring, what you will do, transfer the non-critical functions first. If they work well, then bring in more critical functions. So that should be your strategy. Okay. And when to restore? When your entire facility is safe for working and everything is all set. These are the kind of things you need to understand. Now, you prepared everything. Everything is done. Now it is time for you to implement the plan. What you will do? The plan has to be approved from the management. Then next step is the plan will now be implemented. Maybe you may have to purchase few equipment. You may have to set up some more redundancy to your systems. And then just note that you have to train and educate people that we already have such a process, and these are the kind of expectations from you guys when it comes to the BCP process. And when everybody is made aware of it, it doesn't mean that everything is done. Then also from time to time, we keep on testing these kind of process. For example, we often have fire drills in companies, right? Why? It is for the testing purpose. Maybe during a test, you may come out with few gaps, and that you can fill, right? And then your entire BCP plan, you have to maintain that as a live document. It's just not a document, it's a live document. These are the kind of steps we have to. Now, decision for the recovery site. While setting up your site strategy, recovery strategy, you may also think about different type of sites. Like for example, if the Bangalore location is flooded or Bangalore server got fire, like fire happened or something happened, now you need to immediately switch to some other location. That other location is what is called as the site. So nowadays, cloud is the cheapest solution. Many companies I have seen, they are moving to cloud because of their robust infrastructure and things like it. So people prefer cloud. Another one is a redundant site. If your RPO or RTO is very low, then you may prefer having a redundant site. That means you have a site in Bangalore, also have a site in Mumbai. They are in sync all the time. So immediately you can switch over between two sites. Hot site. So hot site is a location that an organization may relocate to following a major disruption or disaster, right? And it can quickly recover critical IT functionality, right? And the recovery capability is not instant. Please remember, difference between redundant and hot site. In hot site, the recovery capability is not instant. It may be from few minutes to few hours, right? Few minutes to few hours. That is what is the hot site. In a warm site, what will happen? You will choose an alternate location. You will set up networking. You will set up all infrastructure out there. You will set up systems also there, right? You will load the operating system also there. You will load the software also there. But the thing is, everything is almost ready, but you cannot immediately switch over to alternate site because the backup is not restored. You have everything set up, but still to continue, you need to restore your backup. So that may take maybe for 1 to 3 days, like that kind of time frame. That is what is called as a warm site. What is a cold site? A cold site is where you selected a facility, you lay down networking, you lay down your air conditioning and other things, right? But you don't have systems yet. As and when something bad happens, you will immediately go and purchase some systems, put in there, reload operating system, whatever it is there, your images you will reload, and then your data backup also you will restore, and then the site will be up. Right? It's a cheaper one. It's a cheaper option because you are not purchasing each and everything upfront. But at the same time, it will take some time. Maybe from few weeks to even month it can take. So it depends on your own business requirement, what kind of alternate site you are going to. In some cases, we also have mobile site. Mobile site is nothing but everything is all fitted onto a vehicle. And that has some kind of antenna so that network connectivity and everything is there. And you just can drive your vehicle to any place. If some kind of disaster happened at this place, you can move to some other place. So that kind of arrangement is called as a mobile site. Then there is one more arrangement, which is called as a reciprocal agreement. What is that? Reciprocal agreement happens between two companies who are into the same industry. For example, there is a chemical plant and they also are having some kind of good connection with another chemical plant. And they are using the same kind of jigs and kind of labs out there, right? So what can happen? They can mutually agree on such a thing, like if something goes happens bad with you, you come down to my place and I will accommodate you. And if something goes bad at my place, I will go back to your place, right? So that kind of arrangement is what has also been seen. But the problem with a reciprocal agreement is that it is not legally enforceable. You had an agreement, but when the actual disaster happened, the other company is not able to accommodate you because of their own challenges, right? So this is not legally enforced, right? So These are the kind of different recovery site arrangements what we need to understand from exam perspective. Now, backup storage strategies, right? Um, so what happens is, as part of the entire process, we conducted business impact analysis, we calculated MTD and RPO, and also identified the acceptable risk. We also acknowledge the recovery time objective, the actual time it takes for a system to recover, right? And then we also thought about the dependencies on each and everything, right? And then we also talk about the recovery options. So these recovery options, when it comes to backup strategies, maybe the kind of backup you are going for a differential backup or you are going for incremental backup, those kind of things can be thought of. Okay. Now, done everything. Now what? Now the next thing is training people and making people aware and also documenting things. So how you are going to provide trainings? You are going to follow a rule-based training infrastructure for people to get trained on BCP. You may not need to tell each and every nitty-gritty to everyone. Maybe for the end user, you will have something very simplicity. You may also send some emails to them, right? So those kind of things will happen. Otherwise, on the other side, people who are more into the process, they need to be trained, right? So those kind of training we have to provide, and it's because it is some kind of awareness as well. We need to make sure that this happens on a regular basis. Okay. Then, how do you test? Now you made everybody aware that we have a BCP plan, and these are the kind of actions we are going to take when something goes bad. Now, what is your how you are making sure that my BCP process is really effective? That is where you will conduct some kind of testing on your BCP plan. What kind of testing? One can be the read through test. Okay. So what is this? Read through is nothing but a you guys will sit together and kind of go through the plan if there are any gaps. Then similarly, we also have something called as a structured walkthrough, or sometimes we also call it as a tabletop exercise. In this, what will happen? The team will assemble and they will be on a meeting and they will go through that as per a particular checklist. They will go through the entire process and they will see if any of the scenario is kind of looked overlooked or something, right? So that enhances the quality of your entire BCP plan. On the other side, companies also have some kind of checklist test. That means a well thought checklist is already prepared, and then over the meeting we will say, okay, let's assume there is fire in the server room. Now, what kind of actions you will take? So we will go through the checklist and we'll see how well is the plan able to respond to that. Okay, that is sometimes also called as a consistency check. Okay. Another thing is called as the simulation test. So in simulation, what happens is we try to simulate that a actual disaster has happened. Okay. So simulation exercises normally are maybe a location specific, maybe in a particular office, and then they will pre-declare this thing, and then they will conduct this particular exercise. During that exercise, there will be a team who will be gauging the effectiveness of the BCP plan and then documenting it and then working on that. In some cases, there are parallel tests. Parallel test means there is production happening, but side by side, there is some simulation exercise also happening. Just to make sure that business is not impacted, right? We cannot say that let's assume some kind of disruption has happened, everything gone down, and let's go through this, right? Because otherwise the business is getting impacted. So parallel test is where the business is not impacted. We are parallelly going for a test. Now, there are companies who are very, very serious about their BCP capabilities, and they really have the courage to go for the full interaction test. They will say, okay, yes, everything happened bad now. This particular disaster has happened. Let's see how we are able to recover. So in this particular case, there the business also will be fully down, right? So that actually brings in the actual scenario there, right? So these are the different type of testings which can be performed by your team to actually check how effective is your BCP plan. Similarly, as I told you, right, this BCP plan is always a live document. So we have to make sure that the plan is updated all the time because there are infrastructure changes, there are new facilities which are coming up, and there are also changes in regulations, right? So we have to keep it as a live document, think about all these changes. As and when there is a major change, we need to update the BCP plan. And while updating the BCP plan, please make sure that the change management process is followed. That's a mandatory thing. Okay, so these kind of things we need to maintain. At least, if not so soon, at least you should be able to update your BCP plan once in a year. And with that, guys, this is the end of the entire session. And I would welcome you if you have any questions. I am there to answer all of that.